In ADHD, you sit down to work. The task is simple, clear, urgent. You know exactly what needs to be done, and yet nothing happens. Your mind doesn't refuse. It just drifts. 5 minutes pass. You've read the same sentence 3 times and absorbed nothing. You check your phone. You remember something you forgot to do yesterday. You notice a spot on the wall. Anything but the thing in front of you. This isn't laziness. It's not a lack of discipline. It's a wiring issue in the brain that makes focus feel like trying to grab water with your hands. The harder you try, the more it slips away. This is what living with ADHD feels like. ADHD disrupts the brain's control center, the part that manages attention, impulse control, and finishing tasks. In a typical brain, dopamine regulates motivation and reward. It helps you stay on track. It lets you finish what you start. It gives you that small hit of satisfaction when something is done. But in ADHD, dopamine transmission is irregular. The brain doesn't get the reward signal it needs to sustain attention. Tasks that aren't immediately stimulating feel impossible to start, let alone finish. The effect shows up everywhere. You lose track of time constantly. Hours vanish into nothing, or 5 minutes feels like forever. You start 10 projects and finish none of them. Conversations drift mid-sentence because your attention jumped somewhere else. Deadlines pile up not because you don't care, but because your brain won't let you engage until the panic sets in. The focus only lasts as long as the adrenaline does. People assume ADHD means hyperactivity. A kid bouncing off walls. But the inattentive type is quieter, harder to spot. You're not disruptive. You're just elsewhere. Staring at a screen, hearing words but not processing them, nodding along while your thoughts are 3 topics away. You look fine. Inside, you're struggling to stay tethered to the present moment. The frustration compounds because you know what you should be doing. The information is there. The intention is there, but the connection between knowing and doing is severed. You set alarms, make lists, promise yourself this time will be different. And then the same cycle repeats. The task sits untouched. The guilt builds. The shame layers on top because everyone else seems to manage just fine. ADHD doesn't mean you can't focus. It means you can't control what you focus on. Hyperfocus kicks in at the worst times. Hours disappearing into something irrelevant while the urgent task waits. It's not a switch you flip. It's a system that operates on its own rules, indifferent to deadlines, consequences, or how much you want things to be different. And the hardest part is that no one sees it. They see missed deadlines, forgotten plans, half-finished work. They see someone who doesn't try hard enough. What they don't see is the exhausting internal battle to make your brain cooperate with the life you're trying to live. Burnout. You used to care. The work mattered. The goals felt real. You showed up, put in the effort, pushed through the hard parts because it was worth it. But somewhere along the way, something broke. Now the same tasks feel pointless. The motivation is gone. You're not tired in the way sleep fixes. You're depleted in a way rest doesn't touch. This is burnout, the point where chronic stress doesn't just exhaust you, it empties you. Burnout happens when demand outpaces recovery for too long. Your body has a stress response system designed for short-term threats. Cortisol spikes. Adrenaline kicks in. You handle the crisis, then the system resets. But when stress becomes constant, when there's no reset, the system stays activated. Cortisol levels remain elevated. The brain's threat detection stays on high alert. Eventually, the system doesn't just get tired. It shuts down. The first sign is exhaustion that sleep doesn't fix. You rest, but you don't recover. You wake up as drained as when you went to bed. Your body is running on fumes, but the tank never refills because the demand never stops. Then comes detachment. The work you once cared about feels meaningless. Relationships feel like obligations. You go through the motions, but nothing lands. It's not depression, though it can look similar. Depression flattens everything. Burnout is specific. The parts of your life tied to the chronic stress become hollow. Everything else might still register, but the thing burning you out becomes a void you can't escape and can't care about. And then there's the collapse of competence. Tasks you used to handle easily now feel impossible. Your brain doesn't process information the way it used to. Decisions take forever. Small problems feel overwhelming. You're not less capable. Your cognitive resources are just gone. Burnout doesn't make you weak. It makes you run out of capacity. It shows up everywhere. The lawyer who stops caring about cases. The teacher who can't summon patience for students. The nurse who feels nothing when a patient suffers. Not because they're bad at their jobs, but because their nervous system has been overridden for so long that the empathy, focus, and drive that used to come naturally have been drained to nothing. People think burnout means you need a holiday. But burnout isn't fixed by a week off. It's not about rest. It's about a system that has been running past its limits for so long that it stops functioning correctly. Taking time off might help temporarily, but if you go back to the same conditions, the depletion returns faster each time. The cruel part is that burnout often hits the people who care the most. The ones who push hardest, who take on extra work, who can't say no. They pour everything into what they're doing until there's nothing left to pour. And by the time they realize what's happened, the damage is already deep. Burnout doesn't announce itself. It accumulates slowly, so gradually you don't notice until you're already running on empty. And once you're there, the way out isn't simple. Because the problem isn't that you're tired. It's that the system designed to help you recover has been overridden for so long, it forgot how to reset. Brain fog. Mid-sentence, the word vanishes. You know it. You've used it 1,000 times. But right now, in this moment, it's gone. Your thoughts feel thick, sluggish, like you're trying to think through cotton wool. Simple questions take too long to answer. You read the same email 3 times and still don't know what it says. This isn't forgetfulness. It's not distraction. It's your brain struggling to perform the basic functions that used to happen automatically. This is brain fog, and it turns everyday thinking into exhausting work. Brain fog isn't a diagnosis. It's a symptom, a signal that something in your system is off. Inflammation, sleep deprivation, hormonal imbalance, chronic stress, nutritional deficiency. Any of these can interfere with how your brain processes information, and when they do, the fog rolls in. Your brain runs on precise chemistry. Neurotransmitters need to fire at the right time. Blood flow needs to deliver oxygen and glucose. WASPOS products need to clear out. When any part of this system gets disrupted, cognitive function slows down. The fog doesn't hit all at once. It creeps in. First, you notice you're forgetting small things. Where you put your keys. What you walked into a room for. Then it gets harder to concentrate. Meetings feel impossible to follow. Reading takes twice as long as it should. Eventually, even simple decisions become overwhelming. What to eat for lunch? Which task to start first? Your brain doesn't have the processing power it needs, so everything takes more effort and delivers less clarity. And the frustrating part is how invisible it is. You look fine. You sound fine. But inside, you're operating at half capacity, fighting to keep up with demands that used to be effortless. Brain fog shows up differently depending on the cause. After a poor night's sleep, it's that groggy, disconnected feeling that won't lift no matter how much coffee you drink. With chronic stress, it's the constant mental fatigue, the sense that your thoughts are moving through mud. With inflammation, often from illness or autoimmune conditions, it's the persistent cloudiness that makes everything feel just slightly out of reach. The worst part is that brain fog feeds on itself. When you can't think clearly, stress increases. Stress worsens the fog. Sleep suffers. Nutrition slips. The cycle tightens and the fog thickens. People assume you're not trying hard enough, that you need to focus more, sleep better, get it together. But brain fog isn't a motivation problem. It's a systems problem. And until the underlying cause is addressed, no amount of effort will clear it. Alexithymia. Someone asks how you're feeling. It's a simple question. People answer it all the time, but you freeze. Not because you don't want to answer, because you genuinely don't know. You feel something, tension in your chest, tightness in your throat, restlessness. But what emotion is that? Anger, anxiety, sadness. You can't tell. The signals are there, but the translation is missing. This is alexithymia, the inability to identify and describe your own emotional states. Alexithymia isn't about not having emotions. The emotions exist. They're firing in your nervous system, creating physical sensations, influencing your behavior. But the connection between feeling and recognizing is broken. You experience the body's response without understanding what it means. For most people, emotions come with labels. Frustration feels distinct from disappointment. Excitement feels different from anxiety. But with alexithymia, those distinctions blur. Everything registers as a vague sense of discomfort or activation. You know something is happening. You just can't name it. This creates a strange disconnect. You might be furious and not realize it until you've already snapped at someone. You might be sad and mistake it for tiredness. You might be anxious and interpret it as physical illness. The emotion drives your reactions, but you're always a step behind in understanding why. It shows up most painfully in relationships. Your partner is upset and asks what's wrong. You say nothing, not because you're withholding, but because you honestly can't identify what you're feeling. They ask if you're angry. You don't know. Are you? The question itself feels impossible to answer. Over time, this distance from your own emotions makes it harder to connect with others. Empathy requires recognizing feelings in yourself first. If you can't identify your own sadness, how do you recognize it in someone else? Relationships start to feel like navigating in the dark, guessing at emotional cues you can't quite decode. Alexithymia often develops in environments where emotions were dismissed, punished, or ignored. If expressing feelings was met with rejection, the brain learns to shut down emotional awareness as a protective mechanism. It's not a conscious choice. It's an adaptation that becomes so automatic, you don't even notice the gap until someone points it out. And by then, the pattern is deeply set. You've spent years operating without emotional clarity, relying on logic and external cues instead of internal signals. It works, to a point, but it leaves you disconnected from a fundamental part of being human. The ability to know what you feel and why. Anhedonia. The song comes on. The one you used to love. The one that used to lift your mood, make you move, pull you out of whatever you were stuck in. Now it's just sound. Notes and rhythm with no meaning are taked. You hear it, but you don't feel it. Nothing stirs. This is anhedonia, the loss of pleasure. Not the loss of happiness, though that often follows. The loss of the ability to experience enjoyment at all. Anhedonia strips away the reward system that makes life feel worth engaging with. Food loses its taste. Music becomes noise. Conversations feel like work. Hobbies you once cared about turn into obligations you can't summon the energy to fake interest in. Everything flattens. The brain's pleasure response relies on dopamine, the neurotransmitter that signals reward and motivation. When something good happens, dopamine fires. You feel satisfaction. That feeling reinforces the behavior, making you want to do it again. But in anhedonia, that system goes quiet. Dopamine doesn't surge the way it should. The things that used to bring pleasure still happen, but the internal response is gone. You go through the motions, but there's no payoff, no satisfaction, no joy, just emptiness where the feeling used to be. It's not the same as feeling sad. Sadness is an emotion. Anhedonia is the absence of emotion. You're not heartbroken over the loss. You're not grieving what's missing. You're just numb. And that numbness makes everything feel pointless. You see friends. They laugh. They laugh. You don't. Not because you're miserable, but because nothing strikes you as funny anymore. The mechanism that translates humor into laughter has stopped working. You smile because you're supposed to, but the feeling behind it isn't there. The most isolating part is how invisible it is. People see you functioning, going to work, showing up. They assume you're fine. But inside, you're going through life like someone watching a film with the sound off. You see what's happening, but you're not connected to it. Anhedonia often accompanies depression, but it can exist on its own. Chronic stress, trauma, certain medications, even prolonged isolation can all dull the brain's reward circuitry. Once it sets in, the loss of pleasure becomes self-reinforcing. You stop seeking out things you used to enjoy because there's no point. And the less you engage, the more the capacity for pleasure atrophies. People tell you to do things that make you happy. But that's the problem. Nothing does. The instruction is meaningless when the system designed to register happiness has shut down. You're not choosing to feel nothing. The choice has been taken away. Misophonia. The sound is small, a pen clicking, gum chewing. Breathing, breathing. Most people wouldn't even notice. But for you, it's unbearable. Not annoying. Not irritating. Unbearable. Your chest tightens. Your jaw clenches. A wave of rage floods through you so fast and so intense it feels like a physical attack. You want to scream. You want to leave. You want to make it stop by any means necessary. And you know rationally that the reaction is out of proportion. But that doesn't make it any less real. This is misophonia, a condition where specific sounds trigger an immediate, overwhelming fight or flight response. Not because the sound is loud, because your brain has tagged it as a threat. Misophonia isn't about sensitive hearing. It's about how the brain processes certain sounds. In most people, repetitive noises like chewing or breathing fade into the background. The brain filters them out as irrelevant. But in misophonia, those sounds don't get filtered. They get amplified. The auditory system sends the signal to the brain. But instead of being processed as neutral background noise, it gets routed directly to the limbic system, the part of the brain that handles emotions and survival responses. The sound registers as danger, and the body responds accordingly. The reaction is instant. There's no build-up. The sound happens and the rage is already there. Heart rate spikes. Adrenaline floods the system. The urge to flee or fight is so strong it overrides everything else. You're not choosing to be angry. Your nervous system is reacting as if you're under attack. And because the reaction is so extreme, it's almost impossible to hide. You tense up. You snap at people. You leave rooms abruptly. Others see the behavior and assume you're being difficult, oversensitive, unreasonable. They don't understand that what you're experiencing isn't irritation. It's a full-body alarm response to a sound they barely register. The worst part is how isolating it becomes. Eating with others turns into torture. The sound of someone chewing, breathing, swallowing, all of it hits like nails on a chalkboard, except the chalkboard is your nervous system. You can't relax. You can't focus on the conversation. You're just trapped, trying not to explode while your brain screams at you to make it stop. Over time, you start avoiding situations where the sounds might happen. You eat alone. You skip social events. You structure your life around not being exposed to the triggers. And even then, you're never quite safe because the sounds are everywhere. Someone tapping a keyboard. A clock ticking. Footsteps. Ordinary life becomes a minefield. Misophonia doesn't fade with exposure. If anything, it gets worse. The more you hear the trigger sound, the stronger the association becomes. Your brain learns that this sound means distress, and the pathway gets reinforced until the reaction is automatic, immediate. and impossible to ignore. Depersonalization. You're looking in the mirror, but the face staring back doesn't feel like yours. You recognize it. You know it's you. But the connection is gone. It's like watching yourself from outside, a stranger piloting a body that should feel familiar, but doesn't. This is depersonalization. A disconnection so complete that you become a spectator in your own life. Depersonalization is your brain's emergency shutdown. When stress, trauma, or anxiety becomes unbearable, the mind creates distance. It's a protective mechanism, a way to survive overwhelming emotion by numbing the connection to yourself. You stop feeling present in your own body. Thoughts happen, but they feel like they're coming from somewhere else. Actions happen, but you're watching them unfold rather than choosing them. The detachment is constant. You go through conversations, but your voice sounds foreign. You move your hands, but they don't feel like they belong to you. Everything becomes mechanical, automatic. You're functioning, but the sense of being the one doing the functioning has vanished. It's not psychosis. You know what's real. You're not losing touch with reality. You're losing touch with yourself. And that distinction makes it worse, because you're aware of the disconnection but can't bridge it. The worst moments are the ones that should feel significant. A friend's wedding. A family gathering. A milestone you've worked toward. You're there, but you're not. The emotions that should rise don't come. The sense of being part of the moment never arrives. You're just observing, removed, as if you're watching footage of someone else's life. People tell you to ground yourself. Touch something. Focus on your breath. But grounding requires a self to come back to, and that's exactly what feels missing. The techniques might work for a moment, but the detachment creeps back in, steady and unyielding. Depersonalization doesn't always lift on its own. Sometimes it lingers, stretching from hours into days, weeks, months. The longer it stays, the more frightening it becomes. Not because of what it is, but because of what it steals. The ability to feel like yourself, to inhabit your own existence, to be present in the only life you have. Derealisation. The street looks wrong. Not different. Wrong. The colors are too flat. The buildings feel like props. The people walking past seem like they're part of a film you're not in. Everything is technically real, but it doesn't feel real. It feels like a set, a simulation, a thin copy of the world you used to live in. This is derealisation, the sensation that the world around you has become unreal. Derealisation is the brain's attempt to create distance from overwhelming input. Stress, exhaustion, trauma, even anxiety can trigger it. The mind dulls perception, strips away the emotional weight of the environment, and leaves you feeling like you're moving through a dream you can't wake up from. It's not hallucination. You're not seeing things that aren't there. You're seeing things exactly as they are, but the sense of reality attached to them has dissolved. The world becomes two-dimensional. Sounds feel muffled, like you're underwater. Time distorts. Minutes stretch or compress. Nothing feels solid. You walk into a familiar room, and it feels like the first time you've seen it. The furniture is where it's always been, but it doesn't register as yours. You talk to someone you've known for years, and they feel like a stranger. The recognition is there, but the connection isn't. The detachment creates a strange loneliness. You're surrounded by people, places, objects, but none of it feels accessible. You're locked behind a wall you can't see, observing a world you're no longer part of. And because you look fine, because you're still functioning, no one realizes how far away you've gone. Derealisation often comes with depersonalization, the two feeding into each other. You're detached from yourself and detached from the world. The combination leaves you floating, untethered, wondering if anything will ever feel real again. And the terrifying part is that the longer it lasts, the more normal it starts to feel. The strangeness becomes baseline. You forget what it's like to feel fully present. The world stays at a distance, and you stop expecting it to come back. Executive dysfunction. You know what needs to be done. The task is simple, straightforward, urgent even, but you can't start. Not because you don't want to, because the system that turns intention into action has stopped working. This is executive dysfunction, the breakdown of the brain's ability to plan, organize, initiate, and follow through. Executive function is the brain's project manager. It prioritizes tasks. It sequences steps. It shifts focus when needed and keeps you moving toward a goal. But when executive dysfunction sets in, that manager goes offline. Tasks pile up, deadlines approach, and you're stuck, fully aware of what you should be doing but unable to make yourself do it. It's not procrastination. Procrastination is choosing to delay. Executive dysfunction is the inability to begin, even when you're trying. The gap between knowing and doing becomes a chasm you can't cross. You sit there, willing yourself to move, and nothing happens. The simplest tasks become impossible. Making a phone call, sending an email, getting out of bed. Not because they're difficult, but because the mental pathway that connects thought to action is blocked. You know the steps. You've done them 1,000 times. But right now, in this moment, the sequence won't fire. It shows up everywhere. You walk into the kitchen to make food, then stand there, stuck, because the number of steps required feels overwhelming. You open a document to write, then stare at the blank screen for an hour, paralyzed by the decision of where to start. You need to leave the house, but getting dressed, finding your keys, and walking out the door feels like climbing a mountain. And the worst part is the guilt. You're not moving, but your mind is screaming at you to move. The gap between what you want to do and what you're able to do creates a constant, grinding frustration. You feel lazy, useless, like you're failing at the most basic requirements of being functional. But executive dysfunction isn't a character flaw. It's a neurological issue. Stress, ADHD, depression, burnout, even sleep deprivation can all disrupt executive function. And once it breaks down, no amount of willpower fixes it. Because the problem isn't motivation. It's the system that translates motivation into movement. Decision fatigue. What do you want for lunch? It's a simple question. But right now, it feels impossible to answer. Not because you're not hungry. Because your brain has run out of the resources it needs to make even the smallest choice. This is decision fatigue. The mental exhaustion that comes from making too many decisions in a row. Every choice you make, no matter how small, depletes a limited pool of cognitive energy. What to wear, what to eat, which task to start, which email to answer first. Each decision requires your brain to evaluate options, weigh outcomes, and commit to a path. And when you've been making decisions all day, that system starts to break down. The quality of your decisions deteriorates. You start choosing the easiest option, not the best one. You avoid making choices altogether. You defer, delay, or let someone else decide. Not because you don't care, but because the mental effort required feels like too much. Decision fatigue is why you can handle complex problems in the morning and fall apart over what to have for dinner. It's why shopping becomes unbearable after a long day. It's why small, inconsequential choices feel monumental when you're already drained. The effect compounds. The more decisions you make, the worse your judgment becomes. You get impulsive, irritable. You make snap choices you regret or freeze completely, unable to commit to anything. And because the fatigue is invisible, you just feel like you're being difficult, indecisive, or unreasonable. It's not weakness. It's biology. Your brain has a finite capacity for decision-making, and once it's depleted, the system stops functioning correctly. Rest helps. Routine helps. Reducing unnecessary choices helps. But the fatigue doesn't vanish instantly. It lingers, making even the simplest day feel like navigating a maze with no clear path. Zoom fatigue. The meeting ends. You close the screen. And you're exhausted. Not tired from working. Exhausted in a way that feels disproportionate to sitting still and talking. You've been in video calls all day, and your brain feels like it's been running a marathon. This is Zoom fatigue, the specific exhaustion that comes from prolonged video communication. Video calls look like normal conversation, but they demand far more cognitive effort. Your brain is processing multiple streams of information simultaneously. Faces. Voices, your own image staring back at you. Delays in audio. The pressure to stay visibly engaged. All of it creates a mental load that in-person conversation doesn't require. In a physical room, your brain reads body language automatically. Posture, gestures, spatial positioning. But on a screen, those cues are flattened or missing entirely. You're left compensating, working harder to interpret tone and intent from limited visual information. The effort is subtle, but it's constant and it drains you. Then there's the self-monitoring. You're not just listening, you're watching yourself. Checking your expression, adjusting your posture, making sure you look attentive. The self-awareness becomes a second task running in the background, siphoning energy you'd normally use to focus on the conversation itself. And because everyone is staring directly at you, the sense of being scrutinized never lets up. In a real meeting, people look around the room. They glance away. They shift focus. On a video call, every face is locked on the screen, and that intensity, even when it's not intentional, feels relentless. By the third or fourth call, your brain is fried. You're not absorbing information the way you should. Your responses slow down. You start missing details. And by the end of the day, even though you've barely moved, you feel like you've been drained completely. Social battery depletion. You've been out all day. Conversations, small talk, smiling, responding, being present. And now, finally alone, you feel the exhaustion hit. Not physical tiredness. A deep, draining emptiness that makes the thought of one more interaction unbearable. This is social battery depletion. The point where your capacity for social engagement runs out. Socializing requires energy. Even enjoyable interactions demand emotional regulation, active listening, and constant adjustment to the other person's mood and needs. For some, that energy replenishes quickly. For others, it depletes fast and takes a long time to recover. Introverts feel it most acutely, but it's not exclusive to them. Anyone can hit depletion after prolonged or intense social exposure. The more interactions you have, the faster the battery drains. And once it's empty, forcing yourself to keep going doesn't just feel hard. It feels damaging. The signs show up gradually. You stop contributing to conversations. You start giving shorter answers. Eye contact becomes harder to maintain. You're still there, still nodding along, but the energy to engage has evaporated. What's left is the shell of participation, and it's costing you more than it looks. When the depletion is complete, even being around people feels oppressive. Their presence, their voices, the expectation to respond, all of it presses down. You need silence, space, the absence of demands. Not because you dislike the people you're with, but because your system has nothing left to give. And the recovery isn't instant. You can't just rest for an hour and recharge. Depletion requires real solitude. Time alone, without the need to perform, react, or maintain any social facet. The deeper the depletion, the longer the recovery takes. People don't see it as a real limit. They assume you're being antisocial, difficult, or moody. But social battery depletion isn't a choice. It's a threshold. And once you've crossed it, pushing further doesn't make you stronger. It just makes the exhaustion worse. Revenge bedtime procrastination. It's past midnight. You're exhausted. You know you should sleep. Tomorrow will be brutal if you don't. But instead of turning off the light, you scroll. One more video. One more article. One more episode. You're not even enjoying it. You're just refusing to let the day end. This is revenge bedtime procrastination. Delaying sleep not because you're not tired, but because you're reclaiming time that feels stolen. The day didn't belong to you. Work took most of it. Obligations filled the rest. By the time you're finally alone, finally free, the only hours left are the ones you're supposed to spend unconscious. And that feels unbearable. So you stay up, not doing anything meaningful, just existing in a space where no one needs anything from you. The revenge isn't against sleep. It's against the structure of your life. The feeling that you're only living in the margins, the gaps between demands. Staying awake becomes an act of defiance, a way to carve out autonomy even when it costs you the rest you desperately need. But the cost is real. You wake up drained. The day starts harder than it should. Your focus suffers. Your mood deteriorates. And by the time night comes again, you're even more exhausted and even more desperate for time that feels like yours. So the cycle repeats. It's not laziness. It's not poor planning. It's the brain's response to chronic time scarcity. When you feel like you have no control over your waking hours, staying awake becomes the only control you have left. Even when it's destroying you. The irony is that the revenge doesn't work. You're not getting your time back. You're just stealing from tomorrow's version of yourself, making the next day worse, tightening the grip of the very system you're trying to escape. Phantom vibration syndrome. Your phone buzzes in your pocket. You reach for it. Nothing. No notification. No message. The phone didn't vibrate, but you felt it. Or thought you did. The sensation was real enough to make you check. This is phantom vibration syndrome. The brain inventing alerts that never happened. Your phone has trained your nervous system to expect interruptions. Notifications arrive constantly, unpredictably. Your brain learns to stay on alert, scanning for the vibration pattern that signals something needs your attention. Over time, that vigilance becomes so automatic that your brain starts detecting the signal even when it's not there. It's not hallucination. It's pattern recognition misfiring. Your brain is so primed to notice the vibration that it interprets other sensations, muscle twitches, fabric shifting, as the expected alert. The anticipation creates the experience. The frequency increases with phone dependence. The more often you check, the more your brain expects notifications, and the more phantom vibrations you experience. It becomes a feedback loop. You feel the phantom buzz. You check. Nothing's there. But the act of checking reinforces the habit, making the next false alarm more likely. It's a small thing, barely noticeable most of the time, but it reveals how deeply the device has embedded itself into your nervous system. You're not just carrying a phone. You're carrying the expectation of constant contact, constant input, constant disruption. And your body has adapted to that state so completely that it can't tell the difference between real alerts and imagined ones. Nomophobia. You reach for your phone. It's not there. Panic hits instantly. Where is it? You check your bag, your pockets, the table. The panic sharpens. Not because you need the phone right now, because the thought of being without it feels unbearable. This is nomophobia. The fear of being without your mobile phone. It's not about the device itself. It's about what the device represents. Connection, information, control, the ability to reach anyone, look up anything, fill any moment of boredom or uncertainty. Without it, you're cut off, vulnerable, alone in a way that feels dangerous even when you're surrounded by people. The anxiety is immediate. Your heart rate increases. Your thoughts spiral. What if someone needs to reach you? What if something important happens and you miss it? What if you're lost and can't navigate? The scenarios multiply, each one feeding the urgency to find the phone and restore the connection. Even when the phone is nearby but out of reach, the discomfort sets in. You're at dinner. The phone is in your bag. You can't check it. The conversation continues, but part of your attention is somewhere else, wondering what you're missing, feeling the absence like a physical gap. Nomophobia isn't about rational need. It's about dependency so deep that separation triggers a stress response. The phone has become an extension of your sense of security. Without it, the world feels too open, too uncertain, too much to handle on your own. And the worst part is that the fear is self-reinforcing. The more anxious you feel without the phone, the more you rely on it to manage that anxiety. The dependency tightens, and the thought of being without it, even briefly, becomes something you avoid at all costs. Doomscrolling. The news is bad. You know it's bad, and yet you keep scrolling. One more article, one more thread, one more update. Each piece of information makes you feel worse, but you can't stop. You're trapped in a loop of consuming content that's slowly draining you. This is doomscrolling, the compulsive consumption of negative news and information. Your brain is wired to prioritize threats. In evolutionary terms, noticing danger kept you alive. But now, danger is everywhere, delivered in an endless stream directly to your hands. Every refresh brings new crises. Every scroll reveals another reason to be afraid. And your brain, still operating on ancient programming, can't look away. The scroll isn't passive. It's active searching. You're not just absorbing information. You're hunting for it. Refreshing feeds. Clicking headlines. Chasing updates. Each new piece of bad news triggers a stress response, but it also satisfies the compulsion to know, to stay informed, and to not miss the next development. The problem is that the information never stops. There's always another update, another angle, another crisis unfolding in real time. The feed is infinite, and so is the anxiety it generates. You tell yourself you'll stop after one more scroll, but one more becomes 10, 20. An hour disappears and you're left exhausted, overwhelmed, and no better informed than when you started. Doomscrolling doesn't make you safer. It doesn't prepare you for anything. It just keeps you in a state of heightened alert. Stress hormones flooding your system, your nervous system convinced that disaster is imminent, even when your immediate surroundings are calm. The compulsion is hard to break because the uncertainty feels worse than the anxiety. Not knowing feels more dangerous than knowing something terrible. So you keep scrolling, hoping the next update will bring clarity, resolution, or at least a sense that you've reached the end. But the end never comes. The feed just keeps moving and you keep following it down. Digital amnesia. Someone asks for a phone number. You freeze. You don't know it. You've called it 100 times, but the number itself. Gone. Stored in your contacts. Never committed to memory. Why would it be? The phone remembers for you. This is digital amnesia. The loss of information you've outsourced to devices. Memory works through repetition and retrieval. The more you recall something, the stronger the neural pathway becomes. But when your phone holds the information, you never retrieve it. The pathway never forms. The number, the address, the fact all of it stays external, stored in a device you trust more than your own recall. It's not just phone numbers. Directions, appointments, passwords, entire conversations documented in message threads you'll never read again. The information exists, but it's not in you. It's in the cloud, the device, the app. And as long as you have access, that feels fine. Until you don't, the phone dies, the app crashes, the cloud goes down, and suddenly you're stranded. Not because the information is gone, but because you never learned it in the first place. You delegated memory to the device, and now, without it, you're functioning with gaps you didn't know were there. The brain adapts. It stops investing energy in storing information that's easily retrievable elsewhere. It's efficient, rational, even. But it leaves you dependent. Your memory isn't weaker. It's just rerotted. And the rerotting makes you fragile in ways you don't notice until the system you rely on breaks down. Digital amnesia isn't about forgetting. It's about never remembering in the first place. And once that pattern sets in, going back feels impossible. Why memorize when you can search? Why hold information when the device does it better? The convenience is real, but so is the cost. Information overload. The tabs are multiplying. Articles you meant to read. Videos you saved for later. Newsletters piling up unread. Every day brings more. More links. More updates. More things you're supposed to know about. And somewhere in the middle of it all, you've lost track of what actually matters. This is information overload, the point where the volume of available information exceeds your ability to process it. Your brain has limits. It can only hold so much in working memory. It can only focus on so many threads at once. But the information keeps coming. Every notification is a new demand on your attention. Every headline is something you might need to know. The input never stops, and the pressure to keep up never eases. The overload doesn't feel like too much at first. It feels like staying informed, being engaged, keeping your finger on the pulse. But slowly the weight accumulates. You're skimming instead of reading, saving instead of absorbing. The information flows past you, and you're not retaining any of it. You're just marking it as seen, filing it away, telling yourself you'll come back to it later. Later never comes. The backlog grows. The unread count climbs. And instead of feeling informed, you feel buried. Anxious. Like you're falling behind on something essential but can't quite define what. The paradox is that more information doesn't lead to better understanding. It leads to paralysis. Too many perspectives. Too many takes. Too many conflicting narratives. You're drowning in data but starving for clarity. The signal-to-noise ratio collapses, and you're left unable to tell what's important and what's just filling space. Information overload doesn't just slow you down. It fractures your attention. You're never fully present because part of your mind is always somewhere else, tracking the inputs you haven't processed yet. And the more you try to catch up, the further behind you fall. Analysis paralysis. The options are in front of you. Each one makes sense. Each has pros and cons. You weigh them. Compare them. List out the variables. And then you weigh them again. Hours pass. The decision still isn't made. Not because you lack information, because you have too much. This is analysis paralysis, the point where overthinking prevents any action at all. Decision-making requires evaluating options and committing to a choice. But when the options multiply, when every choice branches into more variables, the evaluation process expands beyond your capacity to resolve it. You're not being thorough. You're stuck in a loop where more analysis feels safer than making the wrong choice. The paralysis feeds on uncertainty. What if you pick wrong? What if there's a better option you haven't considered? The fear of regret becomes stronger than the desire to move forward. So you delay, research more, seek more opinions, add more data. But the data doesn't clarify. It just creates more angles to consider, more reasons to hesitate. And while you're deliberating, the opportunity narrows. Deadlines approach. Other people make decisions and move on. You're still calculating, still weighing, trapped in the gap between knowing you need to choose and being unable to commit. The irony is that analysis paralysis often strikes on decisions that don't matter much. The high-stakes choices feel easier because the weight forces a decision. But the small ones, the everyday choices where the consequences are minimal, become impossible. Which restaurant? Which purchase? Which plan? The stakes are low, but the options feel infinite, and the paralysis takes hold. It's not indecisiveness. It's the cognitive system overloading. Your brain is trying to optimize, to find the perfect answer, but perfection isn't available. And rather than accept good enough, You stay frozen, analyzing until the decision is made for you by time running out. Sleep debt. You're getting by on less. 6 hours. 5. Maybe 4 if the night was rough. You tell yourself it's fine. You're managing. Functional. But underneath, something is accumulating. A deficit you can't see but your body is tracking with precision. This is sleep debt. The cumulative effect of not getting enough rest. Sleep isn't optional maintenance. It's when your brain clears out waste, consolidates memory, and resets the systems that regulate mood, focus, and immune function. When you cut it short, those processes don't complete. The work gets deferred, and the backlog builds. 1 night of poor sleep is recoverable. 2 nights, you start to feel it. A week of inadequate sleep, and the debt compounds. Your reaction time slows. Your judgment deteriorates. Emotional regulation weakens. You're more irritable, more impulsive, more prone to mistakes. But because the decline is gradual, you don't notice how far you've fallen from baseline. The debt doesn't announce itself as exhaustion. It shows up as brain fog, as forgetting things you shouldn't, as snapping at people over nothing, as struggling with tasks that used to be automatic. You think you're fine because you're still moving, still functioning. But you're operating at a fraction of your capacity, and the gap keeps widening. And sleep debt doesn't pay itself off easily. You can't binge sleep on the weekend and erase weeks of deficit. Recovery takes time. Consistent, adequate rest over days, sometimes weeks, to restore what's been lost. 1 good night helps, but it doesn't reset the system. The debt lingers, dragging down performance long after you think you've caught up. The cruelest part is that chronic sleep debt recalibrates your sense of normal. You forget what it feels like to be fully rested. The fog becomes baseline, and you keep pushing through convinced you're managing, unaware of how much the deficit is costing you. Circadian misalignment. Your body says it's time to sleep. The clock says it's time to work. You push through. Drink coffee. Force yourself awake. But the mismatch doesn't resolve. Your internal rhythm and your external schedule are fighting, and you're caught in the middle. This is circadian misalignment, when your biological clock and your daily routine are out of sync. Your body operates on a roughly 24-hour cycle, regulated by light, temperature, and routine. This internal clock controls when you feel alert, when you feel sleepy, when your metabolism peaks, when your immune system is most active. It's not arbitrary. It's biology, tuned over millennia to align with the natural day-night cycle. But modern life doesn't care about your circadian rhythm. Shift work, late-night screens, irregular schedules, travel across time zones. All of it disrupts the signal your body relies on to know when to be awake and when to rest. The result is a system trying to function on the wrong timetable. The misalignment doesn't just make you tired. It degrades everything. Sleep quality suffers. You lie awake when you should be asleep, then fight to stay alert when your body is screaming for rest. Appetite goes haywire. Digestion slows. Your immune response weakens. Mood destabilizes. The entire system is operating off rhythm, and nothing works the way it should. Jet lag is circadian misalignment in its most obvious form. You travel, your environment changes, but your internal clock is still running on the old schedule. Your body thinks it's night. The world says it's morning. And for days, you're stuck in that disconnect, exhausted and alert at all the wrong times. But you don't need to travel to experience it. Staying up late on weekends and waking early on weekdays creates the same effect. Your circadian rhythm tries to adjust, but the constant shifting prevents it from stabilizing. You're perpetually out of sync, never quite aligned with either schedule. And the longer the misalignment lasts, the harder it becomes to fix. Your body craves consistency. Without it, the rhythm drifts, and you're left functioning in a state of chronic disruption, always a step behind where you're supposed to be. Emotional blunting. Something happens that should make you feel. A friend shares good news. A sad film plays out on screen. A moment that used to move you. But now nothing stirs. You register the event. You understand what it means. But the emotional response is gone, flattened, muted. Like there's a wall between you and the feeling. This is emotional blunting. The dulling of emotional experience. Emotions are chemical and electrical signals in the brain. Neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine regulate how intensely you feel, how quickly emotions rise, how long they last. When those systems are disrupted by medication, depression, chronic stress, or trauma, the signal weakens. The capacity to feel stays intact, but the intensity drops. Everything becomes quieter, distant. It's not numbness in the way people usually describe it. You're not cut off entirely. You still experience some version of emotion, but it's pale. Washed out. Like watching the world through frosted glass. You see the shapes, but the detail is gone. The blunting affects positive and negative emotions equally. Joy doesn't lift you. Sadness doesn't sink you. Anger doesn't flare. Everything sits in a narrow, muted range. And while that might sound like relief, especially if you've been overwhelmed by intense emotions, it's not. Because the absence of pain comes with the absence of meaning. Without the highs and lows, life feels flat. Events happen, but they don't land. People notice the change. You're less reactive, less expressive. They ask if you're okay, and you say yes because technically you're fine. You're not suffering. But you're also not experiencing much of anything. The blunting creates a strange kind of isolation. You're present but removed. Observing life instead of living it. And the longer it lasts, the more disorienting it becomes. You start to question whether you ever felt things the way you remember. The emotional memory is there, but the access is blocked. You know what it's supposed to feel like to care deeply, to be excited, to be moved. But right now, you can't reach it. And that gap between knowing what should be there and feeling the absence becomes its own quiet ache. Social anhedonia. The invitation arrives. Dinner, drinks, a gathering with people you usually enjoy, and your first reaction isn't excitement. It's dread, not because you dislike them, because the idea of being around anyone feels exhausting and empty at the same time. This is social anhedonia, the loss of pleasure from social interaction. Most people find connection rewarding. Conversations, shared experiences, even just being in the presence of others, these interactions trigger a sense of satisfaction. But in social anhedonia, that reward signal disappears. Socializing stops feeling good. It becomes neutral at best, draining at worst. It's not social anxiety. Anxiety is fear. Anhedonia is absence. You're not worried about how the interaction will go. You just don't care. The motivation to seek connection, the anticipation of enjoyment, the sense that time with others will add something to your life, all of it fades. What's left is the awareness that you should want this, paired with the reality that you don't. The withdrawal is gradual. You start declining invitations. Not aggressively, just quietly. You're busy. You're tired. Next time. And people stop asking. The isolation deepens, but it doesn't feel like loss. It feels like relief. Because the effort required to engage socially without any reward coming back is unbearable. The disconnect creates guilt. You know relationships matter. You know people care about you. But sitting across from someone, pretending to be engaged, feeling nothing while they share something meaningful, that's worse than being alone. At least alone, you're not performing. You're not faking interest you don't have. Social anhedonia often accompanies depression, but it can stand alone. Chronic stress, burnout, even prolonged isolation can erode the brain's ability to find social interaction rewarding. The pathways that link connection to pleasure weaken. And once that link breaks, rebuilding it isn't simple. You can't force yourself to enjoy something. The system has to reset on its own terms. And until it does, you're left navigating a world that assumes connection is universally desirable, while you're standing outside that assumption, unable to access the feeling everyone else seems to take for granted. Learned helplessness. You try. It doesn't work. You try again. Same result. Again. Each attempt ends the same way. Failure. Eventually, you stop trying. Not because you've given up hope entirely, because you've learned that effort doesn't change the outcome. This is learned helplessness. The belief that your actions don't matter. Helplessness isn't innate. It's trained. When you're repeatedly exposed to situations where your behavior has no effect on the result, your brain starts to generalize. It stops seeing effort as meaningful. The connection between action and outcome dissolves. And even when circumstances change, even when escape or success becomes possible, you don't try. Because the lesson you've internalized is that trying is pointless. The classic experiment involved dogs subjected to electric shocks they couldn't escape. Later, when escape became possible, they didn't move. They'd learned that nothing they did mattered, and that learning persisted even when the conditions shifted. Humans operate the same way. Repeat failure, repeat powerlessness, and the brain rewires. Control feels like an illusion. Effort feels like wasted energy. It shows up everywhere. The job you can't leave because every application gets rejected. The relationship where nothing you do improves the dynamic. The goal you've failed at so many times that attempting it again feels absurd. The specifics differ, but the pattern is the same. Try. Fail. Repeat. Learn that trying changes nothing. And once learned helplessness takes hold, it spreads. It's not contained to the original situation. You stop trying in other areas too. Opportunities appear, but you don't pursue them. Problems arise, but you don't address them. The generalized belief that effort is futile becomes a filter through which you see every challenge. The cruelty is that helplessness persists even when it's no longer accurate. The situation that taught you powerlessness might be over. The circumstances might have changed. But the lesson remains, and breaking it requires not just new conditions, but enough repeated experiences of success to override the old programming. Learned helplessness isn't laziness. It's not weakness. It's a rational response to irrational circumstances. The brain adapted to protect you from the pain of repeated failure. But the adaptation traps you, turning temporary powerlessness into a permanent state of mind. Chronic stress load. The weight doesn't lift. One thing resolves, another appears. The deadline passes, the next one is already waiting. The crisis ends, but the tension doesn't. Your body never gets the signal that it's safe to stand down. The alert stays active, day after day, until the stress stops feeling like an event and starts feeling like the baseline. This is chronic stress load. The accumulation of unrelenting pressure without adequate recovery. Stress is designed to be temporary. A threat appears. Your body mobilizes. Cortisol and adrenaline flood your system, sharpening focus, increasing heart rate, preparing you to respond. Then the threat passes. The hormones clear. The system resets. But when the stressors never stop, when the demands keep coming without pause, the reset never happens. Your body stays in a state of activation, running systems that were meant for short bursts over extended periods. The effects compound. Sleep deteriorates. Your immune system weakens. Digestion becomes erratic. Blood pressure rises. Muscles stay tense. The body is burning resources faster than it can replace them, and the deficit builds silently, invisibly, until something breaks. But the damage isn't just physical. Chronic stress rewires the brain. The amygdala, the part that processes threats, becomes hyperactive. The prefrontal cortex, the part that regulates emotion and makes decisions, weakens. You become more reactive, less able to manage your responses. Small problems trigger disproportionate reactions. Patience evaporates. Irritability becomes constant. And because the stress is chronic, you stop noticing it. The elevated baseline becomes normal. You forget what calm feels like. The tension is just part of who you are now, woven so deeply into your daily existence that you can't separate yourself from it anymore. The body keeps score. Even when you're not consciously aware of the load, your nervous system is. And eventually, it stops asking for relief and starts demanding it. Through illness. Through burnout. Through collapse. The stress doesn't go away just because you've learned to tolerate it. It just waits until the system can't hold it anymore. Decision avoidance. The question sits there, waiting. You know you need to answer it. Make a choice. Commit to a direction. But instead you delay. Distract yourself. Find something else that needs attention first. The decision doesn't go away. It just sits unresolved while the pressure to make it builds. Decision avoidance isn't indecisiveness. It's active evasion. Every decision carries risk. The possibility of choosing wrong, of regretting the outcome, of facing consequences you didn't anticipate. And when that risk feels too heavy, the easiest option is to not choose at all. Avoidance becomes the strategy. Not forever, just for now. Until the stakes feel clearer, the path feels safer, the fear feels smaller. But delaying doesn't make the decision easier. It makes it harder. The longer you avoid, the more the options narrow. Other people make choices that limit yours. Opportunities close. Deadlines force your hand. And by the time you're finally cornered into deciding, the choice isn't between good options anymore. It's between whatever's left. Decision avoidance feeds on itself. You avoid a choice. The consequences of avoidance create new problems. Those problems require new decisions. And now you're avoiding those too. The backlog builds. The mental load increases. And the cycle tightens, each avoided decision adding weight to the next. It's not laziness. It's fear masquerading as procrastination. The fear that whatever you choose will be wrong. That you'll make things worse. That the responsibility for the outcome will land on you, and you won't be able to handle it. So you don't choose. And the absence of a choice becomes its own kind of choice. One that strips away your control while letting you believe you're still holding on to it. The irony is that avoidance doesn't protect you from consequences. It just removes your ability to shape them. The decision gets made eventually. By circumstance, by default, by someone else, and you're left living with an outcome you never chose but can't escape. Impostor syndrome. You did the work. You earned the position. The results are real. The praise is genuine. But sitting in that meeting, hearing your name mentioned as an expert, as someone who belongs, all you can think is that they've made a mistake. That eventually someone will notice. That you're not actually qualified. That you've been faking it this entire time. This is imposter syndrome. The belief that your success is undeserved. Imposter syndrome doesn't care about evidence. You can have the credentials, the experience, the track record. None of it matters. The internal narrative is fixed. You're a fraud. You got lucky. You fooled people into thinking you're competent, but it's only a matter of time before the illusion breaks. The disconnect is brutal. Externally, you're succeeding. Internally, you're waiting for the collapse. Every accomplishment is reframed as luck, timing, or other people's generosity. Every mistake is proof that you never belonged. The successes don't count. The failures confirm what you already believed. And the higher you climb, the worse it gets. More responsibility means more visibility. More visibility means more opportunities to be exposed. The stakes increase, but so does the fear. You work harder not because you're ambitious, but because you're terrified that slowing down will reveal the truth. That you're not as good as everyone thinks. Imposter syndrome isolates you. You can't talk about it. Admitting doubt feels like admitting the fraud. So you stay silent, high-performing confidence while internally dismantling every achievement. The gap between how you're perceived and how you perceive yourself becomes a chasm you can't bridge. The cruelty is that imposter syndrome often hits the people who deserve their success the most. The ones who care about quality, who hold themselves to high standards, who reflect on their work and see the flaws no one else notices. The self-awareness that makes them good at what they do is the same awareness that convinces them they're not good enough. And no amount of external validation fixes it. People can tell you you're qualified. You won't believe them, because imposter syndrome isn't about what others think. It's about the story you've told yourself, and that story doesn't change just because the evidence says it should. High-functioning anxiety. You're getting it done. The work is finished. The deadlines are met. The responsibilities are handled. From the outside, you look calm, capable, in control. But inside, the anxiety is constant. A low hum of dread that never quite goes away, even when everything is going fine. High-functioning anxiety doesn't stop you from functioning. It drives you. The anxiety fuels the productivity. You work harder because you're afraid of what happens if you don't. You plan excessively because uncertainty feels unbearable. You check and recheck because the thought of missing something keeps you awake. The fear of failure, of disappointing people, of losing control, it pushes you forward relentlessly, until functioning becomes the only way you know how to manage the fear. But the cost is invisible. You're exhausted. Not just physically, but mentally. The constant vigilance, the endless internal dialogue of worst-case scenarios, the pressure to stay ahead of every possible problem, it drains you. And because you're still performing, still meeting expectations, no one sees it. You don't even fully see it yourself. The anxiety shows up in small ways. The tension in your shoulders that never releases. The racing thoughts that won't slow down. The inability to relax because relaxing feels like letting your guard down. You tell yourself you'll rest after this project, this week, this deadline. But the rest never comes. There's always another task. Another worry, another reason to keep moving. People admire your work ethic. They see dedication, drive, reliability. What they don't see is the panic simmering underneath. The fear that if you stop, everything will fall apart. That your value is tied to your output, and the moment you slow down, you'll be exposed as dispensable. High-functioning anxiety is praised because it looks like success. But it's not success. It's survival. You're not thriving. You're outrunning the fear. And the moment you stop running, the anxiety catches up, and you realize how long you've been holding your breath. Perfectionistic paralysis. The draft is done. It's good. Not perfect, but good. Functional. Ready to move forward. But instead of submitting it, you go back. One more revision. One more adjustment. It could be better. It should be better. And until it's perfect, it's not ready. So you keep refining, tweaking, polishing, and the deadline passes. The opportunity closes. The project sits incomplete because perfect never arrives. Perfectionistic paralysis turns high standards into a trap. Perfectionism isn't about excellence. It's about fear. The fear that anything less than flawless will be judged, rejected, seen as inadequate. So you hold yourself to impossible standards, not because you're ambitious, but because you're terrified of being seen as less than. The paralysis sets in when the gap between your vision and reality becomes unbridgeable. You know what perfect looks like. You can see it clearly, but executing it. That's where the breakdown happens. The work never quite reaches the standard in your head. So you keep trying, keep revising, keep delaying. Because releasing something imperfect feels like failure. But the real failure is never finishing. The project that sits incomplete is worse than the one that's good enough. The idea that never gets shared doesn't matter how brilliant it is. Perfectionistic paralysis doesn't protect your work. It buries it, and the standards keep rising. Every time you do finish something, the bar moves higher. What was acceptable before isn't anymore. The cycle repeats. The paralysis tightens. Until the fear of imperfection becomes so overwhelming that starting anything new feels impossible. Because if you can't do it perfectly, why start at all? The tragedy is that perfectionistic paralysis masquerades as care. You tell yourself you're being thorough, diligent, that you're holding yourself to high standards. But what you're really doing is protecting yourself from judgment by never allowing the work to be judged. And in the process, you rob yourself of the chance to create anything at all. Compulsive productivity. You finish the task. Check it off. And immediately the next one pulls you in. There's no pause. No breath. Just the next item, the next goal, the next thing that needs to be done. You tell yourself you'll rest later. After this. After the list is clear. But the list never clears. And rest never comes. Compulsive productivity isn't ambition. It's avoidance. Being busy feels safe. Productive feels valuable. As long as you're doing something, you're not failing. You're not wasting time. You're not facing the discomfort of stillness. So you keep moving, task to task, project to project. The motion becomes the point. Not what you're accomplishing, just that you're accomplishing something. But the compulsion isn't driven by passion. It's driven by fear. The fear that if you stop, you'll realize you're not enough. That your worth is tied to your output. That without the constant motion, there's nothing underneath. So you fill every gap, every quiet moment, every potential rest with more work, because stopping feels like falling. The cost accumulates invisibly. Relationships suffer. Health deteriorates. Creativity dies. You're producing, but you're not creating. You're checking boxes, but nothing meaningful is getting built. The work becomes mechanical, joyless. A compulsion you can't stop, because stopping would mean confronting the fear you've been outrunning. And the compulsion spreads. It's not just work. It's everything. Optimizing your morning routine, tracking your habits, filling your calendar until there's no space left for anything unplanned. The drive to be productive infects every part of life, turning rest into something that needs to be earned and never quite is. Compulsive productivity looks like success. People praise your work ethic, your output, your discipline. But underneath, it's exhaustion. A system running on fumes, convinced that slowing down equals failure and rest equals weakness. And the longer it continues, the harder it becomes to remember what you're even working toward. Because the work isn't about the goal anymore. It's just about not stopping. Workaholism. The workday ends. You could leave, but you don't. There's always one more email. One more task. One more thing that would be better finished now than left for tomorrow. You stay. Not because anyone asked you to. Because the thought of stopping feels wrong. Uncomfortable. Like you're abandoning something that still needs you. Workaholism isn't about loving your work. It's about needing it. Work becomes the mechanism you use to avoid everything else. Emotions. Relationships. The uncomfortable quiet of having nothing to do. As long as you're working, you have purpose. Direction. A clear measure of whether you're succeeding. But the moment you stop, that clarity vanishes and what's left feels empty. The addiction is real. Work triggers dopamine. Completing tasks gives you a hit of satisfaction. Productivity makes you feel valuable. And like any addiction, the tolerance builds. The amount of work that used to feel sufficient doesn't anymore. You need more. Longer hours. More projects. More responsibility. Not because the work demands it, but because you can't function without it. It shows up in how you fill time. Holidays feel uncomfortable. Weekends create anxiety. Any stretch of unstructured time becomes something to fill with work. You bring your laptop, check emails, plan for Monday. The work isn't urgent, but the compulsion to engage with it is. And relationships suffer. You're physically present but mentally elsewhere. Conversations get interrupted by work thoughts. Time with family feels like time stolen from productivity. People stop expecting your full attention because they've learned they won't get it. The work always comes first. Not because you don't care, because you've made it your identity, and without it, you don't know who you are. The breaking point comes when the work stops rewarding you. Burnout sets in. The dopamine hit fades. But even then, you can't stop. Because workaholism isn't about the work anymore. It's about the fear of what happens if you're not working. And that fear is stronger than exhaustion. Orthosomnia. The tracker shows 7 hours, not quite 8. The deep sleep percentage is lower than yesterday. Your sleep score dropped. You lie there, awake, analyzing the data, trying to figure out what you did wrong. How to optimize tomorrow. Sleep has stopped being rest. It's become a performance metric you're failing to hit. This is orthosomnia, the obsession with achieving perfect sleep. Sleep tracking promises control. Data. Insight into something that's always felt mysterious. But the tools designed to improve sleep can make it worse. You're not sleeping. You're being graded on how well you sleep. And the anxiety about the score keeps you awake. The obsession starts reasonably. You want to sleep better. Feel more rested, so you track it. Monitor patterns. Adjust routines. But soon the data becomes the focus, not how you feel. Not whether you're rested. Just what the numbers say. And when the numbers are bad, you panic. You change everything. Sleep schedule, temperature, light exposure, supplements. The more you try to control it, the more elusive good sleep becomes. Because sleep doesn't respond well to pressure. It requires letting go. And you're doing the opposite, tightening your grip, micromanaging every variable. The worst part is the irony. You started tracking to improve rest. But now, the tracking is stealing rest. You wake up in the middle of the night and immediately wonder if this will ruin your score. You lie awake calculating how much sleep you've lost. The obsession with optimization creates the very problem it's trying to solve. And the data doesn't help. It just feeds the anxiety. Every bad night confirms you're doing something wrong. Every good night raises the bar for what counts as acceptable. The goal keeps moving. Perfect sleep becomes an impossible standard, and the pursuit of it ensures you'll never reach it. Health anxiety. The pain is small. A twinge. A sensation that wasn't there before. Most people would ignore it, but you can't. Because what if it's something serious? What if ignoring it means missing the early signs of something catastrophic? So you focus on it, monitor it, and the more attention you give it, the bigger it becomes. This is health anxiety, the fear that every symptom is evidence of illness. Health anxiety doesn't require being sick. It requires noticing your body. And once you start noticing, you can't stop. A headache becomes a brain tumor. Fatigue becomes a degenerative disease. A strange sensation becomes proof that something is deeply wrong. The body, which everyone experiences discomfort in, becomes a minefield of potential catastrophe. The anxiety feeds on uncertainty. Medical knowledge is complex. Symptoms overlap. Rare diseases exist, and the internet is full of worst-case scenarios. You search your symptoms. The results terrify you. Now you're not just worried. You're convinced. The fear becomes a certainty, and no amount of reassurance changes it. You seek confirmation. Doctors. Tests. Scans. And when they come back clear, the relief is temporary. Because the anxiety doesn't trust the results. What if they missed something? What if it's too early to detect? The negative result doesn't erase the fear. It just shifts the focus to the next symptom, the next concern. And the vigilance is exhausting. You're constantly scanning your body for signs of malfunction. Every ache, every irregularity, every sensation that feels different. The hyper-awareness creates a feedback loop. The more you focus on your body, the more sensations you notice. And the more sensations you notice, the more evidence you find that something is wrong. Health anxiety isolates you. People grow tired of reassuring you. Medical professionals stop taking your concerns seriously. You know rationally that you're probably fine, but the fear is louder than reason. And living in that gap between knowing you're likely okay and feeling certain you're not becomes its own kind of suffering. Cyberchondria. The symptom appears, you search it. The results flood in. Articles, forums, medical websites. All of them offering possibilities, most of them terrifying. You read deeper. Click more links, cross-reference symptoms. And with every page, the certainty grows. You're not fine. You have something serious. The internet just confirmed it. Cyberchondria is health anxiety turbocharged by search engines. The internet offers unlimited access to medical information. That sounds helpful, but for someone already anxious, it's fuel. You search a mild symptom. The algorithm serves you the worst possibilities first. Cancer, rare diseases, irreversible conditions. The benign explanations are buried under the catastrophic ones, and your brain latches onto the fear. The search becomes compulsive. One article isn't enough. You need more data, more confirmation. But the more you read, the worse it gets. Because medical information without context is dangerous. You don't have the training to assess probability, to weigh likelihood, to distinguish between correlation and causation. You just see the overlap between your symptom and something fatal, and the conclusion feels inevitable. And the internet never tells you to stop worrying. It tells you to get checked, to be vigilant, to trust your instincts. Every forum post, every article reinforces the idea that your fear is valid, that you're right to be concerned, that ignoring symptoms is dangerous. The reassurance you're searching for doesn't exist online. Only more reasons to be afraid. The cycle tightens. You feel a new symptom. You search it. The results terrify you. The fear creates stress. Stress creates more physical symptoms. You search those too, and now you're trapped in a feedback loop where anxiety generates the very sensations that feed the anxiety. Cyberchondria doesn't just steal peace of mind. It distorts your relationship with your own body. You stop trusting how you feel and start trusting what the search results say you should feel. And that disconnect between lived experience and algorithmic fear becomes impossible to bridge. Touch starvation. No one's touched you in weeks. Not a hug. Not a handshake. Not even an accidental brush of contact. You didn't notice at first. But now you feel it, a low-level ache. Not physical pain. Something harder to name. A hunger for closeness that isn't being met. Your body is screaming for contact it's not getting. This is touch starvation, the deprivation of physical connection. Touch is a biological need. Skin-to-skin contact releases oxytocin, the hormone that regulates bonding and stress. It lowers cortisol. It signals safety. Without it, the nervous system stays on edge. Stress increases. Mood deteriorates. The absence of touch doesn't just feel lonely. It destabilizes you. And modern life makes touch starvation easy. You live alone, work remotely, interact through screens. The opportunities for casual physical contact, the kind that used to happen naturally, have evaporated. You're surrounded by people digitally but isolated physically. And the lack compounds. The effects are subtle at first. You feel more anxious, more irritable. Sleep suffers. Emotional regulation weakens. You're not connecting the symptoms to the absence of touch because the deprivation is invisible. But your body knows. It's keeping score. And the deficit is growing. Touch starvation is different from loneliness. You can be around people and still be touch-starved. Conversations don't fix it. Messages don't fix it. What you need is physical. A hand on your shoulder, a hug that lasts longer than a second. Contact that reminds your nervous system that you're not alone. But asking for touch feels impossible. It's vulnerable. Awkward. Especially in a culture that's increasingly wary of physical contact. So you don't ask. You endure. And the starvation deepens, leaving you more disconnected, more brittle, more desperate for something you can't quite name, but feel the absence of constantly. Loneliness epidemic. You're not alone. Not technically. You have people in your life, colleagues, acquaintances, maybe even friends. But sitting in your flat, scrolling through social media, watching everyone else seem connected, you feel profoundly isolated. Not because no one's around, because no one really sees you. And you're not sure you see anyone either. Loneliness isn't about being alone. It's about feeling alone. You can be surrounded by people and still feel isolated. Conversations stay surface level. Interactions feel transactional. Everyone's busy. Everyone's distracted. The depth of connection that used to happen naturally now requires intentional effort, and no one has the energy for it. So you drift, present but not connected, visible but not seen. The loneliness is structural. Communities have fractured. People move frequently. Work is isolating. Socializing requires planning, scheduling, coordinating across packed calendars. The casual, spontaneous interactions that used to build connection have been optimized out of existence. And what's left are curated encounters that feel more like obligations than genuine connection. And technology makes it worse. You're more connected than ever, but lonelier than ever. Social media offers the illusion of contact without the substance. You see people's lives. You interact with their updates. But the exchanges are shallow. Performative. You're not connecting. You're just maintaining the appearance of connection, while the actual feeling of being known, of being understood, slips further away. The epidemic isn't just affecting isolated individuals. It's affecting everyone. Entire generations are reporting record levels of loneliness. The mechanisms that used to create community, shared spaces, regular gatherings, consistent face-to-face contact, have eroded. And nothing has replaced them. The loneliness isn't personal failure. It's systemic collapse. And the worst part is how invisible it is. Everyone's lonely, but no one talks about it. Admitting loneliness feels like admitting failure. So people stay silent. Keep pretending they're fine. And the isolation deepens, not because connection is impossible, but because everyone's too afraid to admit they need it. Chronic procrastination. Tomorrow. That's when you'll start. Tomorrow you have more energy, more focus, more clarity. Tomorrow the task won't feel so overwhelming, so you push it off. Again. And when tomorrow arrives, the same reasoning applies. The task is still there. The resistance is still there. And tomorrow becomes tomorrow again. Chronic procrastination isn't laziness. It's a defense mechanism gone wrong. The task triggers discomfort, anxiety, fear of failure, overwhelm, and procrastination is the brain's way of escaping that discomfort. Not dealing with it, just delaying it. The relief is immediate. The consequences are distant. So the pattern repeats, over and over, until procrastination stops being a choice and starts being the default response to anything that feels difficult. But the delay doesn't make the task easier. It makes it harder. Deadlines close in. The pressure increases. What could have been manageable becomes a crisis. And now you're not just dealing with the original discomfort. You're dealing with guilt, shame, The weight of knowing you created this situation by putting it off. And the cycle reinforces itself. You procrastinate. The outcome is worse than it needed to be. That confirms the belief that you're bad at this, that you can't handle it. That next time will probably go the same way. So when the next task appears, the anxiety is higher. The resistance is stronger, and procrastination feels even more necessary. Chronic procrastination isolates you. You can't explain why simple tasks feel impossible, why you can't just start. People see the delay and assume you don't care, that you're irresponsible. They don't see the internal battle. The hours spent thinking about doing the thing, paralyzed by the gap between wanting to start and being unable to. And the longer it continues, the more it costs. Opportunities slip away. Relationships strain. Self-trust erodes. You stop believing you can follow through. Because the evidence says you can't. And that belief becomes the lens through which every new task is viewed. Not as something to do, but as something you'll inevitably put off until it's too late. Motivational depletion. You used to want things. Goals felt real. Progress felt meaningful. But somewhere along the way, the drive faded. Now, the things you're supposed to care about feel distant, abstract. You go through the motions, but the internal push, the energy that used to carry you forward, is gone. Motivational depletion is the slow draining of drive. Motivation isn't infinite. It's a resource, and when you spend it without replenishing it, when you push toward goals that don't reward you, when effort stops leading to progress, the reserve depletes. You're not choosing apathy. You're running on empty. The depletion shows up as inertia. Tasks that used to excite you feel like chores. Long-term goals lose their pull. You know what you should be doing, but the gap between knowing and caring has widened into a chasm you can't cross. The why that used to drive you has evaporated, and what's left is just the obligation to keep moving without any internal reason to. And the absence of motivation creates guilt. You're supposed to want this. Other people want things. They have drive, ambition, the energy to pursue goals, but you don't. And instead of recognizing the depletion, you interpret it as personal failure, as laziness, as proof that you're not capable of sustaining effort. But motivational depletion isn't weakness. It's burnout of a different kind. You've been running on willpower alone for too long, forcing yourself to care about things that stopped mattering, pushing toward goals that no longer align with what you actually need. And eventually the system stops cooperating. The drive shuts down, not because you're broken, because you've been ignoring the signals that the path you're on isn't sustainable. Recovery requires more than rest. It requires reconnecting with what actually matters, finding goals that feel intrinsically rewarding, letting go of the ones that were always external obligations dressed up as personal ambitions. But when you're depleted, even that process feels impossible, because caring about anything requires the very resource you've run out of. Screen fatigue. You close the laptop. Your eyes ache. Your neck is stiff. Your brain feels foggy. You've been staring at screens all day. Work, messages, scrolling, video calls. The content changes, but the medium doesn't. And by the end of it, you're not just tired. You're drained in a way that sleep doesn't fully fix. Screen fatigue is the cumulative exhaustion of constant digital engagement. Screens demand focused attention. Your eyes have to track movement, adjust to brightness, process information at a rate that's faster than comfortable. Your brain has to filter signal from noise, maintain engagement, suppress the urge to look away. It's low-level strain, constant, relentless, and it adds up. The fatigue isn't just visual, it's cognitive. Screens fragment attention, notifications interrupt, tabs multiply. You're never doing just one thing. You're managing multiple streams of input, switching contexts, trying to stay on task while the environment is designed to pull you elsewhere. The mental load accumulates silently, and by the time you notice it, you're already drained, and the fatigue carries over. You finish work, close the laptop, and then what? You open your phone, check messages, scroll feeds, watch something. The screen changes. The content changes. But the strain doesn't stop. You're just shifting from one form of digital engagement to another, never giving your system the break it needs to reset. The effects compound. Concentration weakens. Irritability increases. Sleep suffers because the blue light and mental stimulation linger long after the screen turns off. You wake up tired. Spend the day on screens. End the day more tired. And the cycle continues, deepening the fatigue until it feels like a permanent baseline, rather than something that can be recovered from. Screen fatigue doesn't announce itself dramatically. It's just a slow, grinding exhaustion that makes everything feel harder than it should. And because screens are unavoidable, because work and connection and entertainment all flow through them, escaping the fatigue feels impossible. You're trapped in a system that demands constant engagement while steadily draining the capacity to sustain it. Emotional exhaustion. You don't have anything left to give. Someone needs support, reassurance, attention. And you want to help. You care. But when you reach for the emotional energy to respond, there's nothing there. Just emptiness. You're not being cold. You're not withdrawing out of cruelty. You're just completely, utterly spent. Emotional exhaustion is the depletion of the capacity to feel and respond. Emotions require energy, processing them, regulating them, offering them to others. When you're constantly managing your own emotional states while also holding space for other people's, the system drains. And unlike physical exhaustion, emotional exhaustion doesn't always show. You can still move, still function, but inside the well is dry. The exhaustion builds slowly. One difficult conversation, one crisis, one person leaning on you. None of it feels like too much at the time. But the load accumulates. And because emotional labor is invisible, because you're expected to just keep showing up, keep caring, keep being available, you don't notice the depletion until you're already running on fumes. And when you're emotionally exhausted, everything feels harder. Small conflicts become unbearable. Minor disappointments hit like major losses. You stop having the bandwidth to manage reactions, to stay patient, to offer the empathy that used to come naturally. It's not that you don't care. It's that caring costs energy you don't have. The guilt compounds the exhaustion. You know people need you. You see them struggling. And you feel terrible for not being able to give more, but the resource is gone. Forcing yourself to engage emotionally when you're depleted doesn't create genuine connection. It just creates resentment. Toward others for needing you. Toward yourself for not being able to meet the need. Emotional exhaustion doesn't recover quickly. You can't rest for a weekend and refill the tank. It requires sustained withdrawal from emotional demands. Time alone. Space to feel without having to manage how you feel. Permission to stop performing care when the capacity for it has been stripped away. And until that recovery happens, you're just going through the motions empty, waiting for something to shift. Compassion fatigue. You see the suffering, you recognize it, but you don't feel it anymore. The empathy that used to rise automatically when someone was in pain has dulled. You care, in theory, but the emotional response is gone. Flattened. You're not heartless. You're exhausted from caring too much for too long. Compassion fatigue is what happens when empathy becomes unsustainable. Empathy is a gift. But it's also a drain. When you're constantly exposed to pain, distress, and need, when your role requires absorbing other people's suffering, the system that generates compassion starts to break down. Not because you've stopped caring, because the brain is protecting itself from overload. The fatigue hits hardest in caregiving roles: nurses, therapists, social workers, anyone whose job demands constant emotional presence in the face of suffering. But it's not exclusive to professionals. It can happen to anyone who becomes the emotional anchor for others. The friend everyone leans on. The family member who holds it together while everyone else falls apart. The person who's always available, always listening, always absorbing. And the cost is invisible. You don't lose the ability to function. You just lose the ability to feel. Compassion turns into a performance. You say the right things, offer the right support. But underneath, the genuine emotional connection is gone. You're running on autopilot, managing responses without actually experiencing them. The guilt is crushing. These are people you care about, people who are genuinely suffering, and you feel nothing. Or worse, you feel resentment, annoyance that they need you again, frustration that their pain is something you have to manage. The gap between who you want to be and who you've become feels unbridgeable. Compassion fatigue doesn't resolve by trying harder to care. It resolves by stepping back, creating boundaries, limiting exposure to suffering, allowing yourself to be unavailable, to prioritize your own emotional reserves over other people's needs. And that feels selfish, cruel even. But it's the only way the system recovers, because compassion, like any resource, can't be endlessly extracted without replenishment. And once it's gone, forcing it doesn't bring it back. It just deepens the depletion. Decision regret loop. You made the choice, committed, moved forward. And now, every quiet moment, the doubt creeps in. What if you'd chosen differently? What if the other path was better? You replay the decision. Analyze it. Torture yourself with alternate versions of how things could have gone. And the regret doesn't fade. It just cycles, over and over. The decision regret loop is when the decision is made but the mind refuses to let it go. Regret is natural. But when it becomes a loop, when the same decision gets rehashed endlessly without resolution, it stops being reflection and becomes a trap. You're not learning from the choice. You're just punishing yourself for making it. The loop feeds on uncertainty, on the fact that you can never know how the alternative would have played out. So the mind fills in the gaps, always in favor of the path not taken. And the loop is exhausting. You can't move forward because you're still stuck in the past, second-guessing a decision that can't be undone. Every outcome, good or bad, gets filtered through the lens of what might have been better. Success feels hollow because maybe you'd have succeeded more on the other path. Failure feels devastating because it confirms the choice was wrong. The regret doesn't stay contained to one decision. It spreads. Past choices get re-examined. Future decisions become paralyzing. Because if this choice led to regret, why trust yourself with the next one? The loop erodes confidence, makes every decision feel like a potential mistake waiting to be revealed. And other people don't help. They tell you to let it go. Move on. What's done is done, but their advice doesn't touch the loop. Because the loop isn't about logic. It's about the inability to accept uncertainty. The need for confirmation that you made the right choice. And that confirmation never comes. Because right and wrong aren't absolute. They're constructs you layer onto outcomes that were always going to be ambiguous. Breaking the loop requires accepting that you'll never know. That the other path might have been better or worse, and there's no way to find out. That the decision you made was made with the information you had, and rehashing it won't change the outcome. But acceptance is hard when the mind is wired to seek certainty. So the loop continues. The regret lingers, and the energy that could be spent on the present gets burned in an endless relitigation of a past that can't be changed. Orthorexia. The menu arrives. You scan it, not for what sounds good, for what's clean, pure, unprocessed. The bread has gluten. The sauce has sugar. The vegetables might not be organic. One by one, the options fall away. What started as wanting to eat healthily has turned into something else. A rigid set of rules you can't break. A fear of food that isn't perfect. Orthorexia is the obsession with eating correctly. It's not about weight. It's not about appearance. It's about purity. Control. The belief that if you can just eliminate the wrong foods, avoid the toxins, follow the rules perfectly, you'll achieve health, clarity, safety. But the rules keep tightening. What was acceptable yesterday isn't today. The list of forbidden foods grows, and eating stops being nourishing. It becomes a moral test you're constantly failing. The obsession starts reasonably. Cut out processed food. Eat more vegetables. Read labels. But soon reading labels turns into rejecting entire categories. Gluten, dairy, sugar, anything with preservatives, anything not organic. The restrictions multiply. And with each new rule, the sense of control feels stronger. Safer, like you're protecting yourself from harm. But the control is an illusion, because orthorexia isn't about health. It's about anxiety. The food rules are a way to manage fear. Fear of illness, of contamination, of losing control over your body. And the tighter the rules, the more fragile the system becomes. One slip, one impure meal, and the anxiety floods back, stronger than before. Social situations become unbearable. Restaurants don't have safe options. Dinner invitations create panic. Eating at someone else's house means losing control over ingredients. So you start avoiding, declining invites, eating alone. The isolation deepens, but at least the food is pure. And the irony is brutal. You're trying to be healthy, but the obsession is making you sick. Nutritional deficiencies develop, energy drops, relationships suffer. The mental load of maintaining perfect eating is exhausting, but you can't stop, because stopping feels like giving up, like letting toxins in, like losing the one thing you've been able to control. Orthorexia hides behind wellness. It looks like discipline, dedication, health consciousness. But underneath, it's the same mechanism as any eating disorder. Control masquerading as care. And the longer it continues, the harder it becomes to remember that food was supposed to sustain you, not define you. Fear of missing out. Everyone's there. The photos are already up. The event you decided not to attend. And sitting at home scrolling through the updates, the regret hits. You should have gone. You're missing it. The fun. The connection. The moment everyone will remember. And you're not part of it. The decision to stay home felt right an hour ago. Now it feels like a mistake. Fear of missing out isn't about what you're missing. It's about what you think you're missing. FOMO operates on comparison. You see highlights, curated moments, the best parts of other people's experiences. And your brain fills in the rest, always in their favor. You imagine the event was better than it was. The conversation more meaningful. The experience more fulfilling. And because you weren't there, you can't verify. The gap becomes whatever your anxiety decides to put in it. The fear feeds on social media. Every post is evidence that something is happening without you. Every update confirms you made the wrong choice. You could have been there. You were invited. And now you're outside, watching, while everyone else is inside, living. The exclusion is self-imposed, but it doesn't feel that way. It feels like you're being left behind. And FOMO doesn't just apply to events. It's career opportunities, relationships, experiences, trends. The sense that everyone else is moving forward, making progress, living fully while you're stuck. The comparison is endless. And because you only see the surface, the wins without the struggles, the highlights without the mundane, the gap between their life and yours feels unbridgeable. The worst part is that FOMO keeps you from enjoying what you actually chose. You stayed home because you needed rest. But now you can't rest. You're too busy regretting the decision. You picked one path, but your mind is trapped on the other, imagining all the ways it would have been better. The present becomes a reminder of what you're not doing, and satisfaction becomes impossible. FOMO doesn't reflect reality. It reflects the story you tell yourself about reality. And that story is always skewed. Because the fear isn't about missing out. It's about not being enough. Not doing enough. Not living up to some imagined standard of a full, meaningful life. And no amount of attending every event, chasing every opportunity will fix that. Because the fear isn't external. It's the lens through which you see everything. Bed rotting. The alarm goes off. You turn it off. You don't get up. Not because you're tired, because the thought of facing the day feels unbearable. So you stay. In bed, scrolling, watching. Existing in a space where nothing is required of you. Hours pass. The day moves on without you, and you're still there. Not sleeping. Not resting. Just rotting. Bed rotting is the complete withdrawal into passivity. It's not depression, though it often accompanies it. It's not laziness. It's a shutdown. The world outside the bed feels too demanding, too bright, too much. And the bed becomes the only place where you're safe from expectations, from decisions, from the crushing weight of having to be functional. The rotting is literal. You're not engaging with life. Not moving, not producing, just lying there letting time pass, watching shows you don't care about, scrolling feeds you won't remember. The activity is enough to keep boredom at bay, but not enough to require real presence. You're occupying time, not living it. And the longer you stay, the harder it becomes to leave. The bed isn't just comfort anymore. It's avoidance. The longer you avoid, the more intimidating re-entry feels. The tasks pile up. The messages go unanswered. The day you were supposed to have slips away. And tomorrow the gap will be wider, the shame deeper, the inertia stronger. People don't understand it. They see someone choosing to stay in bed all day and assume it's a choice. But it's not. It's collapse. The inability to summon the energy to engage. And the guilt makes it worse. You know you should get up, shower, eat, do something. But knowing doesn't create the capacity to act. It just adds another layer of failure to the weight already pressing down. Bed rotting doesn't feel like rest. It feels like giving up. Not on the day. On yourself. And the longer you stay there, the more the bed becomes a place you're trapped rather than a place you're choosing. The safety turns into stagnation. And the question stops being, when will I get up? And starts being, can I? Understimulation distress. Nothing's happening. The day is quiet. Calm. You should feel relaxed. But instead, you feel restless. Agitated. Your brain is searching for input it's not getting. The silence feels oppressive. The stillness unbearable. You need something. Anything. Noise. Movement. Stimulation. But the environment isn't providing it. And the absence feels like suffocation. Understimulation distress is what happens when your nervous system craves input it's not receiving. Some brains need constant stimulation to regulate. The hum of activity. The buzz of notifications. The stream of information. When that input disappears, when the environment goes quiet, the nervous system doesn't relax. It panics. The quiet isn't peaceful. It's a void. And your brain scrambles to fill it. The distress shows up as agitation. You can't sit still. Can't focus. Can't settle into the moment. You reach for your phone. Put on music. Open multiple tabs. Not because you want to engage with any of it. Because the absence of stimulation feels intolerable. The need for input is so strong that even low-quality distraction is better than nothing. It's the opposite of overstimulation. Where too much input overwhelms, too little creates a different kind of suffering. The brain, accustomed to constant engagement, doesn't know what to do with silence. It interprets the absence as a problem, a gap that needs filling. And until it's filled, the discomfort persists. Understimulation distress rest impossible. Quiet moments, the kind that should recharge you, become something to escape. Meditation feels torturous. Walks without podcasts feel empty. Sitting with your own thoughts feels unbearable, because your brain has been trained to expect constant input. And when it's not there, the system misfires. The irony is that the distress perpetuates the need. You reach for stimulation to ease the discomfort. But the more you feed the need, the stronger it becomes. The tolerance builds. What used to be enough stimulation isn't anymore. And the gaps, the quiet moments, become even more intolerable. You're trapped in a cycle where the solution deepens the problem. Numb routine living. Wake up, coffee, commute, watch, lunch, work, commute, screen, sleep, repeat. The routine is efficient, predictable, safe. But somewhere along the way it stopped feeling like living. It's just motion. A sequence of actions you perform because they're what you do, not because they mean anything, not because you chose them, just because they're the shape your life has taken. Numb routine living is when life becomes autopilot. You're functioning, meeting obligations, getting through the day, but the feeling is gone. The sense that any of it matters, that you're moving towards something, that there's purpose underneath the motion. The routine has flattened everything. Each day is the same, and in the sameness meaning has evaporated. The numbness isn't sadness. It's absence. You're not depressed. You're just not feeling much of anything. The things that used to spark something, excitement, curiosity, satisfaction, don't anymore. They're just tasks. Items on the list. The commute is dead time. The work is obligation. The evening is recovery for tomorrow's repeat. Nothing breaks through, and the routine reinforces itself. Because changing requires energy, decision-making, risk. And when you're already numb, already running on fumes, the idea of disrupting the routine feels impossible. So you don't. You keep going. The same loop, the same motions, the same hollow repetition. People live like this for years, decades, waiting for something to shift, for motivation to return, for the routine to start feeling like life again. But the shift doesn't come from waiting. It comes from breaking the pattern. And breaking the pattern requires the very thing the numbness has taken away. The ability to care enough to try. Numb routine living is invisible suffering. You look fine. You're productive, stable, responsible. But inside, you're not living. You're performing, going through motions that have lost their meaning. And the longer it continues, the harder it becomes to remember what it felt like when life was more than just a series of tasks to complete before starting over again tomorrow. Ambient stress. You can't point to one thing. There's no crisis, no emergency, nothing acutely wrong, but the tension is there. Constant, low grade, a background hum of unease that never quite resolves. You wake up with it, carry it through the day, fall asleep with it still there. It's not about anything specific. It's just the weight of everything all at once, all the time. Ambient stress is the accumulation of 1,000 small pressures with no single release point. It's the bills, the news, the messages you haven't answered, the tasks you're behind on, the uncertainty about the future, the awareness that things could go wrong at any moment. None of it is catastrophic. But together, it creates a constant state of low-level alarm. Your nervous system never fully relaxes because there's always something. And the something never stops. The stress isn't big enough to address. It's not a problem you can solve. It's just the texture of modern life. The sense that you're always slightly behind. Always managing. Always one step away from things falling apart. And because it's ambient, because it's everywhere, you stop noticing it consciously. It just becomes the base feed. The way things feel. Normal. But ambient stress isn't harmless. It wears you down. Sleep suffers. Patience thins. The capacity to handle actual crisis diminishes because you're already operating at capacity, just managing the background noise. Small disruptions feel enormous. Minor setbacks trigger disproportionate reactions. Not because you're weak, because you're already maxed out. And there's no escape. You can't take a break from ambient stress because it's woven into the structure of how you live. The phone, the inbox, the responsibilities, the awareness of global problems you can't fix but can't ignore. The stress isn't an event, it's the environment. And as long as you're in the environment, the stress persists. Ambient stress doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand attention, it just sits there, draining you, slowly, steadily, until one day you realize you've been tense for so long you've forgotten what it feels like to be calm. And by then, the stress isn't something happening to you. It's just what being alive feels like.